This is Powerslave, a 1996 release from the good folks at Lobotomy Software. If you've played Doom, you know the formula. Make your way through maze-like levels, collect keys, open doors, explore, and blow away hordes of enemies, all while avoiding all kinds of tricks and traps, and conserving ammo when you need to. It's a great formula, and it's one that produced so many Doom clones back in the mid-90s, and that's not a bad thing. I consider this to be the golden age of FPS games, so when I discovered Powerslave on the Saturn, I was thrilled. One thing I really appreciate about FPS games from this era is that they're not realistic. The levels are abstract in nature, and everything in the level acts to serve the gameplay. They're not trying to be virtual reality, which in my mind is a really good thing because they allow for so many strange configurations of the landscape, platform jumping over pools of lava or strange walkways and elevators. I mean, take Doom as an example of this. Doom is supposed to take place on a space colony, and it looks nothing like a real space colony, partially due to the limitations of the engine, but think how boring that would have been if you're just kind of wandering around mess halls and barracks and stuff. Instead, both this and Doom are, at their core, a video game, and I love that. Speaking of weird stuff that doesn't really exist, you get all kinds of weapons that you find in these ancient pyramids, like machine guns or the holy hand grenade or whatever that I was using a second ago. At some point in the game you go down into this ancient tomb and you find a flamethrower of all things. I don't remember the ancient Egyptians having flamethrowers or flamethrowers from ancient mythology, but I wasn't ever the best student of history, so don't quote me on that. Sometimes Powerslave can be a bit cheap with its traps. I don't know if you saw there, but those fire-spitting heads kind of popped up instantly and shot me as soon as I stepped on the plate. If you're low on health, you would have just croaked right then and there. Likewise, there are some first-person platforming parts that are extremely unforgiving because if you're above lava or slime in this game, you die as soon as you touch that stuff. And in Powerslave, when you die, you have to do the whole level over again, and it would have been nice if you could, say, keep your keys like you do in the game Descent, which kind of acts like a checkpoint. Or they could have gone the Doom route, which, you lose some health when you touch the lava or slime or whatever, but generally if you're fast and get out in time, you can go and try that part again immediately. Where in Powerslave, a lot of times they put these parts at the end of a level, so you get to the end of the level, you have to do some really tricky part, you fail it, and you have to do the whole level again. Now, the levels are fairly short, think maybe Doom Episode 1 length levels, but still, I thought it was unneeded frustration. Now, I am glad that they don't have checkpoints every 2 seconds, like in a lot of games, because that's just obnoxious. I find that that's really not fun. Games that rely on frequent checkpoints or quick saves, in my book, are just in need of some more design. And that's one really good thing about Powerslave, is generally when you die in this game, it's because you really messed up, not because an enemy got a cheap shot in or something like that. What they don't have in this game are instant projectiles that cause a lot of damage. You can see every projectile coming, or either that or the enemies are melee, which in my opinion goes a really long way towards ensuring that the game is fair. Not that there aren't a few cheap moments in Powerslave, but they didn't really get me down too much. They weren't very frequent. This guy firing at me now is one of the weaker enemies. That blue light thing looks really cool, but doesn't actually cause a whole lot of damage. You know what does cause a lot of damage? Bosses. This is the first boss of the game several levels in, and it has this jump where if he lands while you're still on the ground, it stuns you and your screen turns blue. It also has these death head things that it fires at you. And overall it's a fairly good boss design. you know, the game is fairly well balanced, and I'm down to a pistol in this part, and I'm still able to defeat the boss. So you're not hopeless once you run out of ammo for your good guns. And this level gives you a full ammo recharge once you enter it. Every few levels you recover an artifact that gives you new powers. For instance, this over here is a thing that lets you do float jumps. So now I can go back to this one level where I saw a pit and float to the bottom and enter new territory. It's kind of like a Metroidvania in that respect. The game is based on hubs, and you go back to the same hub every now and then and open up new territories.
Your fearless displays as a warrior provide hope for this dying land, and your quest for peace will bring you just rewards. A deep cavity has been excavated in the south, where there's rumor of a fierce weapon that engulfs its victims in a breath of fire.
Yeah, listen to Ramses, man. He'll tell you where to go. It actually takes a little bit of the guesswork out of finding out where to go next in such a open structure game, but still leaves enough of the thinking and exploration intact so that it's not like, say, Metroid Prime, where the computer tells you exactly where to go at every time. In this, it's more like hints. Let's talk about the graphics for a second. They are excellent for a 1996 FPS game. In fact, you know, back then I mostly gamed on a PC, and the PC was limited to 256 colors. If I had seen the kind of lighting effects and everything in Powerslave in 96, I think I would have just flipped. I mean, look at those blue fireballs. There wasn't really anything quite like that on the PC. The shadows, the kind of shading had already been done by Quake, and this game's a bit Quake inspired, but you know, I think it's a lot more fun than Quake ever was single player. The art design is a lot more coherent, though, you know, Powerslave doesn't have a multiplayer mode. There's no deathmatch here, so it is missing that. It does have a multiplayer game you can unlock called Death Tank, which is basically Scorched Earth or Scorched Tanks, you know, pretty much exactly, which is not a bad thing because that's a great game. But yeah, there's no deathmatch in this. There are a bunch of awesome levels filled with all kinds of secrets, but yeah, no deathmatch. Control in Powerslave is spot on, making full use of the Saturn 3D controller, the analog one. You know, it uses the analog pad for turning and moving forwards and backwards, and it also uses the analog triggers for strafing, so you can really get that fine-grained control that you usually associate with mouse in Powerslave. And additionally, it has just the right amount of inertia so that you can do complicated maneuvers and not slide too much still. You can tell they really spent a good amount of time getting the controls to feel just right. I also love how the view tilts a little bit as you turn. It really adds to the feel of the game. Yeah, there's all kinds of great graphical effects in Powerslave. I love the translucent water with the kind of plasma on the top. The graphics do have some issues. They do warp a little bit the way most stuff did in that era of consoles, and very unlike Quake or Doom or something like that, that had this perfectly accurate texture mapping. It doesn't go crooked the way a PlayStation 1 game does because it's not made out of triangles, but it does bend a little bit. Enemy placement in Powerslave is quite good, although sometimes there are these sector bugs where you'll have an enemy kind of just standing there, usually when they're in a different room or kind of a few rooms away. If you've ever played GoldenEye on the N64, you kind of know what I mean, although it's not as prevalent here as it is in that game. The bug here is more in line with how it behaves in its, you know, say Duke 3D. Frame rate in Powerslave is generally really high. I believe it's 30 frames a second, pretty much solid, although there are parts like this where it just drops a tad. I've noticed it in mostly outdoor areas, and not when there's a lot of action, just nice architecture. One thing Powerslave has that I really appreciate as someone who's awful with directions is a map. Now the environments are generally distinctive enough that I don't need to whip it out that much, but it's been a lifesaver sometimes, and it does come in handy as well when you're doing first-person platforming, because the platforms you're jumping on show up in the top view, and it's centered properly, so you can kind of watch that as you hop from platform to platform. I love all the destructible walls and switch puzzles in Powerslave. I think they're really fun. They require a little bit of thinking, and they're never too obscure. You know, the switches are usually around the same area that the object that the effect is, so you'll never find yourself having to tromp all over the map figuring out what the hell just opened when you flip the switch. And in addition to being open world, the game also has a bit of replay value in the form of these transmitter pieces that you can assemble to get the good ending. And it's kind of cool how they did it. When you get close to a transmitter piece, you'll hear a mild beeping sound that intensifies as you get closer, and to get the transmitter usually involves solving some kind of switch puzzle or just navigating the map in a clever way. What's really cool too is that you can tell what levels have a transmitter piece that you haven't gotten yet, because you can hear the beeping from the map screen. Very well thought out to avoid frustration. Now, if you're thinking, hey, I remember that game for DOS, maybe I should get that version. Well, this is the DOS version. It's based on the build engine and has all new levels. It uses some of the same enemies, but that's about it. In fact, it's pretty disappointing. You know, the jumping physics are totally whack in this. The levels seem really stiff in a way that other build games even didn't. Yeah, if you're going to get Powerslave, get the Saturn, or I believe the PlayStation version is also very similar to the Saturn one. So those two I think are the ones to get. So that wraps up Powerslave, a console FPS game that I really feel is on par with some of the better efforts from that time on the big PC. It's got good levels, good controls, replayability, and it's just really fun. And the most important thing, it's named after an Iron Maiden song. For real, yeah. Okay, well, thanks for checking out my review, and be sure to subscribe for more of them. I'll catch you next time.